from KOLD News 13, Arizona. Tucson discusses strategy for upcoming street releases.
We have the knowledge and the capacity to be flexible, which we'll need to be because this will be an unpredictable situation and we'll have to react to it as it unfolds.
In immigration.
Yeah, okay, they have to come up with a strategy. They have to discuss a strategy. Why are they always pretending that this is a big, complex matter when it's really not?
Action, Tucson is weighing its options as it prepares for street releases of asylum seekers and migrants, which is now just a couple of weeks away. Tucson's mayor and city.
Oh, yeah, so you mean they're getting prepared to dump thousands of illegals onto the streets of Tucson, right? That ship sailed. It's gone. No asylum seekers. And then, of course, they knew that made zero sense, so they switched to newcomers because it was clear there was no such thing as asylum. You don't traverse 4, 5, 6 countries and then claim asylum and then say it's the Republicans' fault when, of course, you had Boe Jiden early on saying we should surge to the border.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
The council are set to hammer out a plan to deal with thousands of asylum seekers who will most likely be released on the streets of Tucson starting the first day of April, when federal funding for migrants.
Asylum from what? Right? At this point, you might be able to pretend that the people of Haiti are seeking asylum because warlord barbecue has taken over. But what were you fleeing? Where were you coming from? They're never going to tell us any of that.
And when the money runs out for migrant aid.
The city hopes to be able to control the situation without federal financial help. But Foster's live at City Hall, but it's not like the city has no experience with this.
Well, yeah, the city has a lot of experience with this. They've been doing this for the past 5 years. However, they've been doing it on the federal dime, and that's to the tune of $1 million a week. Now, the city of Tucson just doesn't have that kind of money. So next week, they're going to hash out some ideas. But whatever idea they come up with, they're going to have to do it on the cheap.
Yeah, this is just so wacky. Well, what could we possibly do? How could we solve this problem? Any suggestions are welcomed. Well, not any suggestion.
So the city of Tucson will stand committed to not using taxpayer funds here locally.
There will likely need to be some city funding, although the city hopes it will be minimal. There will need to be some.
Yeah, we're not going to use taxpayer, city funding. We're going to try to find a rich, successful business owner or entity to fund all of these illegals. Is that what you're going to do?
Police protection, not only for the asylum seekers, but for the community as well. Health needs will have to be met. Humanitarian needs are also on the table. But according to this city memo, the plan will begin by having a no-touch approach.
It depends heavily on volunteers and those asylum seekers having their own resources and being able to make their
Tucson Chief of Staff, Lane Mandel. I mean, really? She's the Chief of Staff. She is going, my word.
Their way to their final destination.
But Tucson has a problem many other border communities don't have, which could make getting those folks to their final destination on their own more difficult than anticipated, especially since the operation begins April 1st, which is when temperatures begin to heat up in the desert.
Oh, no. So in Arizona, it's going to be too hot for the illegals. In New York and Chicago, it's too cold for the illegals. They don't want the food they've been given. So we just need to do a better job at accommodating these entitled criminals.
See a lot of families released by Border Patrol in our community here. So we'll see a lot of small children. Occasionally we even see pregnant women. So we will have to manage through the extreme temperatures as we move into the summer months.
Complicating the issue is the city won't know how many people will be released on any given day. So the city will need to be nimble and flexible, changing almost on a daily basis as the numbers and the needs also change.
Yeah, so we can't really predict any of this. Could be so many people, we have no idea. but we just need to make sure that we bend over backwards and jump through flaming hula hoops to make sure that these people feel comfortable on somebody's dime.
Sometimes we get that information as short as a couple hours before people are released in the community. So there's really no way for us to forecast how many people will be part of the street release program.
Street releases now have the attention of lawmakers in Washington. However, at this point, there is no bill on the table or any money allocated.
Yeah, well, so they have the street releases, but quite obviously, what's the plan, right? In New York, I said it a million times, you have to come up with 40 times the rent, tax returns, proof of employment, ID. I'm sure there's less of a burden in Arizona to rent a place, but how do you expect them to do it? It's just going to turn into a third world. They're going to be selling stolen goods on the sidewalk just like they are in Queens. What? Right? So, we're going to have a strategy for the street releases. But, well, first of all, you don't have a strategy. Secondly, it's not really that much of a complicated problem. And thirdly, if your strategy is to just let them free on the street, what do you expect they're going to do? Where are they going to go? What are they going to be doing? You think they're going to go to the library and work on their resume and get a job that pays them under the table? Or is it more likely they're going to just immediately start committing crimes?
To handle the issue. It's little more than lip service being offered right now.
Migrant release in our streets is a big issue, and unfortunately it's apparently about to possibly get worse. So I'm very concerned with the street releases that we may see now. We're seeing street releases now.
However, that's little comfort to the city of Tucson, Pima County, Santa Cruz, and Cochise counties, which must deal with the coming crisis all on their own without any federal financial help.
The mayor
Well, I mean, it was the federal government that gave you the migrants, so maybe they did help a little bit, right? Like, well, okay, they're not going to give you money now, but they're the cause of all these problems, so they're, right? Like, I guess they expect the federal government to pay for it because it's the federal government's problem, and then they think about solutions when it's really all quite simple.
Council has been clear that this is a federal problem that needs a federal solution, and we're still hopeful that the Congress will do the right thing.
Yeah, so of course the federal government created the problem and now they're trying to sell the solution, but they're also not helping these border communities, which is, I mean, it really is just a race to the bottom, right? So they created this issue and then drafted up a slush fund bill that Republicans federally didn't sign, but then Katie Hobbs vetoed a bill in Arizona specifically that Republicans drafted because the illegals were afraid that they were being targeted. That's literally what happened. There's an article from one of these weirdo commie pinko rag publications in Arizona about how the illegals feel like they're being targeted by laws, which of course they are, but they're not going to enforce it anyway. So you might feel a little scared, but they're not going to do anything until maybe, hopefully, knock on wood, something changes in the next, 8 to 10 months.
And the city of Tucson will likely lean on Catholic Community Services, Casa Elitas. They've been handling this.
Oh, yep. So they're going to bring in the Catholic NGO nonprofits to smuggle people. Perfect.
Bulk of the load since this whole thing began about 10 years ago. But of course, they don't have the money either, so they're looking.
Oh, yeah, it was 10 years ago, right? And I'm sure, yes, there's always been illegal immigration problems, but are you just going to pretend that it wasn't exponentially ramped up in the past couple years, just like the reporters out in California about the Panera Gate and the minimum wage carve-outs? Oh, well, we don't know what happened. It's quite clearly corruption, and they're just pretending they don't know. They don't have any idea, right? The same thing with, there's been a lot of heart problems in the last 3 or 4 years, but we don't know why. What is happening? Even though those are the same people that told you to obey everything we tell you to do, right? So walk through doorways backwards, only take left turns, jump twice before turning on the it's crazy, and they're just we don't know. Well, we can't. What's possibly going on here?
Looking for volunteer help, they're looking for donations, but certainly they cannot match the $1 million a week that the federal government was providing.
Yeah, so even the completely corrupt criminal NGOs can't provide as much money as the feds. From Forbes breaking news, Mark Robinson issues direct message to Biden after arrest of terror suspect who crossed the border. And I can only assume he's going to take a little bit different, more straightforward approach than the other hacks.
Last week in Gates County, North Carolina, an armed illegal immigrant was arrested who is on the federal terrorist watch list. His name is Awet Hagos. Reports.
And this, of course, is a completely different problem, right? So you have the criminal illegals who are drunk driving and shooting at police and robbing New Yorkers. But in this entirely different sect, you have hardened, people who want to terrorize the nation. And I might argue that the, Venezuelans are terrorizing too, but it is in a completely different fashion, lower level.
Indicate that Hagos came into the United States from Haiti, but is originally from an area near Yemen, a known hotbed of terrorist activity. Police were called to the scene after reports of shots fired, and when deputies moved in to apprehend him, Hagos attempted to disarm a deputy before fleeing. It took law enforcement over 4 hours to finally apprehend him. After learning of this incident, I spoke with Sheriff Ray.
What's going on with the TV behind him?
Campbell of Gates County. I was briefed by him on the situation and thanked him for honorably discharging his duties and for the courageous actions of his deputies. More importantly, I promised I would do everything I could to assist him. At this time, the suspect is currently being held and has been charged with 3 counts of assault on a government official, 3 counts of resisting a public officer, 1 count of carrying a concealed weapon. The Gates County Sheriff's Office currently has 12 deputies, yet they find themselves dealing with a violent illegal immigrant that our own national security has flagged as a potential terrorist threat. Earlier this morning.
Yeah, and of course, they quite literally could not care any less, right? Some people are obviously Lake and Riley. I mean, the list goes on, the cops, but that's just the cost of doing business for a corrupt regime that is literally smuggling people and, of course, drugs.
Morning, my office sent a letter to President Biden. I called on President Biden to give immediate answers. In the letter, I raised questions such as...
Okay, this is probably where it's going to get good, but you couldn't possibly for one split second think that President Boe Jiden is going to give you an answer to anything. There's going to be some weirdo crony who's going to give you a word salad about how it doesn't really matter and it's not representative of all the illegals that we've let in.
How did Hagos enter the United States? How did Hagos get to North Carolina? Did he travel by air, interstate, or rail? Are there others? Are there other places that he's been in our state, that he's traveled to or through? And should those areas be on heightened alert? Is he alone? Are there others we should be watching for? Why is Hagos on the terrorist watch list? What organizations does he have ties to? What is his motive and his training? Mr. Hagos reportedly applied for.
And remember, so he's asking a lot about this guy's background, like how is this happening? How did he get here? And we remember early on during Rona, the federal government, the Democrat establishment party, Andrew Cuomo specifically, could tell you every detail down to their favorite meal as a child regarding the first people to come down with Rona. We got all that information. But
first, we're going to speak about the situation that was reported last night with a person who tested positive for the coronavirus. That woman is a healthcare worker. She's 39 years old. She had been working in Iran and came back on Tuesday to New York. She did not take any public transportation. As she was a healthcare worker, she was very aware of this situation and the potential for this situation. We don't believe that she was contagious when she was on the plane or when she took a private car from the airport to her residence. But out of an abundance of caution, we will be contacting the people who were on the flight with her from Iran to New York and the driver of that car service. And we'll be contacting them and following up with them as the facts dictate.
These people who are accused or who are on the terrorist watch list and quite literally eliminating Americans, we don't know too much about them.
And was denied citizenship. Why? President Biden, when Hagos was denied citizenship, who was alerted of his presence? Did the federal government report this to the state? Did the federal government report any of his activity to local law enforcement? Are there more illegal immigrants on the terrorist watch list here in North Carolina? We deserve answers to these questions.
Yeah, seems like fairly reasonable questions. I will admit, though, it's very hard to concentrate with the TV behind him going on and off constantly.
Over the last few years, North Carolina has seen multiple attacks on our infrastructure. We've experienced a cyber attack on the natural gas pipeline, and we've had multiple power substation attacks. Hagos was living just an hour from multiple military installations, both in North Carolina and Virginia. It's imperative that we know immediately if he had known terrorist ties or whether he's been in contact with any associates thereof.
I mean, I guess so. You could. It doesn't even really matter. You could just get rid of him.
Know if there are any imminent dangers to the citizens of North Carolina. The silence from the Biden administration on this situation is not an isolated incident. Not even our elected officials in Congress or the Senate have been able to get any answers from him. Last week, members of our federal delegation wrote a letter demanding answers regarding a migrant housing facility in Greensboro. They received no information from the Biden administration, despite this facility going online just in the last few days.
So they're literally popping up migrant facilities all over the country. Nobody can keep track of these people. When I mean, this is wild. I long for the good old days of go get a Rona test, go get a Rona test. Like that level. It's crazy how when you think the corruption is bad, it can quite literally only get worse. They constantly replace crazy, awful politicians with people who are even worse and crazier, right? Like, so when they were telling you couldn't even get on the train without a mask, that was just the start of it. Then you couldn't even leave the house. You couldn't go to school. You couldn't go to work. But we're also going to leave the border wide open, and these people may or may not be forced to get a pharmaceutical, which, of course, is the least of what they're thinking about.
There are reports that this migrant facility in Greensboro will house around 800 immigrants from 13 to 17 years old. This facility deserves a high level of scrutiny, and we deserve answers. This is not because we fear some hypothetical tragedy, but because we have experienced it.
Yeah, because it's only a hypothetical fear-mongering, a hypothetical, tragedy until it actually happens. And then when it does happen, they say, well, it's not a big deal. It's not representative, even though these things happen over and over and over again. I made a full video about some of the named criminal migrants, which, of course, was the short list of people that we know. There's obviously loads of other stories about, unnamed 38-year-old, unnamed 28-year-old, unnamed 41-year-old, right? It just never ends.
2 years ago, right here in Wake County, a deputy was murdered by illegal immigrants. It was reported that one of those three suspects was first apprehended by ICE as a minor. He later managed to cross back again into the United States from Mexico. Under Joe Biden's administration, over 7 million individuals have entered our nation illegally. And it's estimated that roughly 500,000 illegal immigrants are here in North Carolina. And we have very little information about these individuals. The federal government has refused to give answers. There have been very little coordination with local elected officials and law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the federal government is not going to give you any answers like that. This situation is your answer. This is what they're doing. You deal with it.
So I have a message for President Biden. Mr. President, next week you will be here in our state, and we deserve answers. Our police and law enforcement deserve support, transparency, and information. Mr. President, for you to keep our state in the dark about an armed illegal who's on the terrorist watch list from an area near Yemen is not only wrong, it's dangerous.
Yeah, so this, of course, is a little bit more straight to the point, but who is he asking? I mean, it's clear, it's abundantly clear to everybody, even the weirdo lefties, that Boe Jiden is not in charge. So I don't know who you're asking, but kudos to this guy for making a statement that's a little bit more to the point versus the NGO advocates in Arizona who are saying, oh, well, we don't know exactly what we're going to do.